the foundations of morality are simply the same as the foundations of prudence. That is to say, self-interest, rightly understood, is identical to morality. And so, if you understand what it is for something to be in your own interest, you will understand why you have to be moral. Unfortunately, that really doesn't work except under two highly implausible conditions. One of them is that you care passionately about something called the harmony of your soul, which is what content Plato gives to this doctrine as he defends it, or whether you're really just like a child going for rewards and punishments, and you actually expect to be rewarded or punished after you die for everything that you've done during your life. So that doesn't work very well either. Now, I think that in some ways the most promising of all these attempts to justify morality is what is now known as natural law. I think that the argument that something is good because it's natural is something that many people are inclined to accept. Even now, I get many people knocking on my door from Greenpeace and other organizations in which by people who are convinced that if you simply think that something is natural, that shows that it's good, and if you can show that it's not natural, that shows that it's bad. Right? So GM foods are bad, and it's good to follow nature, live according to nature, and so on. This is an ancient recipe. I think actually that this argument is best captured by this lovely New Yorker cartoon from Gardner Ray, in which this lady, if you can't quite see from the back, on an airplane being offered a drink says, "No thank you, I don't think nature intended us to drink while flying." I don't actually think that any argument from nature ever produced by serious people has ever been any better than that. However, it's worth looking a little bit at the best attempt to get something out of this, and that is Aristotle's, and of course Aristotle here also means Aquinas. Aristotle's idea is this: every natural object, and particularly every living thing and every human being, has inherent aims, even if it doesn't have any conscious aims. It inherently, as it were, aims to be something or at something. And you can figure out what that is by looking attentively at what happens in nature to that sort of thing, always or for the most part. This is Aristotle's famous phrase, always or for the most part. And by observing nature in this way, you can read off, as it were, nature's intentions, even though you don't have to believe that nature has any intentions or that nature is represented by a god or creator that has any intentions. You just, as it were, read the intrinsic teleology of nature by looking attentively at what happens always or for the most part. Now, this is very much what we do in practice in biology. People look at an organ and they say, what's that for? And can we find some explanation of something that appears to have no function, like the appendix? And you see what happens, and by analyzing what happens, you figure out somehow what it is, quote unquote, meant to do. But this meant to do is not to be taken to imply that anybody intends anything or that it was designed literally. And this is, of course, the basis of the Catholic doctrine of natural law. And Aquinas, I'm sure, had he been living now and observed enough homosexual activity among penguins, would certainly approve of gay marriage because he would find that what happens always, or for the most part, largely includes things that he had not observed. So if you are a natural law theorist and you believe in this, then you know, you might get very different results depending on your experience of the natural world. However, the scheme actually cannot work at all given what we know about evolution. Because what we know about evolution is, or includes, that species are not fixed. So that what happens always, or for the most part, is not an indication of, as it were, where nature is going. If you think about the steps from the point where our ancestors were unicellular organisms to the point where our ancestors became recognizably human beings, at every single step from that unicellular organism to us, there was some single freak of nature. Something that couldn't possibly have been happening always, or for the most part, because, in fact, that was the first and only instance of it, and it happened to work, and so it happened to leave descendants, but it couldn't possibly have been judged to be normal or natural by Aristotle's or Aquinas' criterion. If all your ancestors had been normal, you would be a bacterium. That's how you can really sum up that simple thought. And as a matter of fact, remember that most things are unicellular organisms. Most living things are in fact unicellular organisms, and indeed every single one of you carries in you many trillion unicellular organisms that work inside you, with you, sometimes against you, but constitute about 10% of your own mass in weight. So, what you can be absolutely sure of is that the way in which we turned into human beings involved events that were at every step, quite literally by that criterion, unnatural. So does that mean we have to give up the whole idea that in biology there is teleology and that there are functions? No, it doesn't. We can construct a notion of teleology that is in some respects like Aristotle's, but in some important respects unlike it. It's like Aristotle in that what we do is we look at the whole range of, as it were, possible effects that something has, or rather we look at the actual effects that something has, and then we ask which of those are, as it were, accidental, a term which comes from Aristotle itself, and which are essential in the sense that it is what that thing is meant to do. And again, meant to do is a metaphor, and what we have to do is to find a way of filling out that metaphor without drifting into a sort of designer mythology. And so the way that we do it is by relying not on what happens always or for the most part, but on the causal consequences of what has happened in the past. Okay? Now, I'm going to explain this in a little bit more, but not in a technically elaborate way, which has been done by various people in philosophy over the past 2 or 3 decades in a way that I think is utterly convincing and pretty much